this morning. It's good to be here with you. This is Brighter Morning with Bhoe, and my name is Bhoe Tiwari, and we are so glad that you are watching on MCTV, Multicultural TV, or listening on U97.5 FM, Hot Like Pepper Radio, Multicultural Radio. We have this program 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. every morning, and we have discussions that are pretty deep and engaging with very, very knowledgeable people. And we talk about issues that are important to you, important to all of us. We talk about current issues, not in the sense of what is the news today, but we talk about current issues that are affecting the life we are living and affecting what we are likely to be faced with in the immediate and longer future. So we try to keep current, we try to keep pace with what's happening in the world and in the region, and we of course focus on Trinidad and Tobago and what's happening here. The big news today, of course, is that yesterday the Parliament met and passed the extension of the state of emergency. The state of emergency is now extended by 90 days, 3 months, and that takes us August, that takes us into September, October, November. So that is the scenario facing us here. The most important consideration for the citizen is that the curfew is from 9 p.m. until 5 a.m. So it means that all activities are possible from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. Of course, when the curfew ends at 9 p.m., you have to be home. So that means that whatever you are doing, you have to organize yourself to be home by 9 p.m. And what it means is that you cannot leave your house in the morning until the clock strikes 5 a.m. So the Prime Minister's justification for it was congregation. That's to say, he did not want nighttime activities involving families or friends or socialization in large groups, because he feels that that is the one sure way to ensure the spread. You know, I listened to part of the debate yesterday. I wasn't able to listen to all, but I didn't hear too much talk about the Delta variant. And I think that is the worrisome thing that we need to take into account. We've had 3 cases in Trinidad and Tobago, which the Ministry of Health did well to trap at the airport, and these people were put into quarantine. And then yesterday I read that another 2 people had been found to be infected, and they have been put in quarantine. What we do not know, we do not have the information at all. We do not know yea or nay whether the Delta variant is in the community somewhere in Trinidad and Tobago. And what we do know is that when the Delta variant gets into a community, it spreads like wildfire. And that the most vulnerable are the unvaccinated. We have a lot of unvaccinated people in Trinidad and Tobago. I myself thought that by now we would have had about 600,000 people vaccinated. And I didn't expect the vaccine hesitancy to become severe until about 600,000 people had been vaccinated. I knew we would have problems, but I felt that there was enough anxiety about the vaccine. Remember, we didn't have vaccines. Then we only had one AstraZeneca in small quantities. Then we had the Sinopharm donation and then the purchase. And then, of course, we subsequently had the more AstraZeneca and enough Sinopharm, and then we got the Pfizer, and now we have Johnson & Johnson. So the issue of choice is there, and a lot of the Pfizer vaccines are going to be used for children in the schools to try and get schools open. So one of the key issues, besides the state of emergency and the focus in the state of emergency on preventing people or creating the conditions so that people do not congregate in a liming or easygoing environment. One of the problems, one of the other issues is the fact that we have to vaccinate people. And if we are to open up the economy, and we are opening up, we need to have large numbers of people vaccinated. There is a discussion ongoing in Trinidad and Tobago, and there are all kinds of views being presented. But at the end of the day, I think that given all the information we have, the chances of somebody not being faced with the likelihood of both infection that can cause death is better if you are vaccinated. And the chances of somebody dying because they got infected with the coronavirus are very bad if you are unvaccinated. So this is a personal risk that you are managing, first of all, your own life. And secondly, it's a family and community risk that you are managing. And if you were to pick up the mutation, the Delta virus, the Delta variation that is causing so much havoc all over the world among the unvaccinated population, then you could endanger not just your family and the community, but the entire country. As I said, I don't know if the Delta virus is here, the Delta variant is here. And I imagine we will find out soon. But I think we owe ourselves a responsibility, and we owe others a responsibility to make sure that we do whatever is required to keep the place as safe as possible and to keep the country as secure as possible from the spread of the Delta virus. So, as I said, I didn't hear too much talk about this, but I think this is the worrisome development that one is hoping will not arrive for a long time. We're hoping to stave it off as much as possible. I want you to know that, the Delta virus is in Jamaica, and they have a very rough time trying to control that. Right now, they are going through a very, very rough period trying to control that. And we have to be careful here in Trinidad and Tobago. If the Delta virus were to find itself in Tobago, for instance, with a small population, tightly knit as that community is, in a small island space where basically you are locked into this small island, that can be very, very dreadful. And the people in Tobago are not vaccinating fast enough. I really think that you've got to step up this in Tobago. because the dangers to you are extremely severe. And then in Trinidad and Tobago, there are parts of the country that, seem to have a lot of unvaccinated people, and those communities in Trinidad and Tobago need to step up also. If you have the Delta variant in some community in Trinidad that is tightly locked in, especially in the urban centers, that can be very horrible. If you get into one of the tightly connected communities in central Trinidad, that can also be terrible. So you have to be very, very, very careful. We have to protect ourselves and we have to protect the community. Okay? And the parents, I would say to you, you can't be second guessing issues about your children. You have to keep your children safe. You have to give them an education. You have to get them back to school. We've got to have some normalcy, especially those in 4th and 5th and 6th forms who have examinations and so on. We know what this world is like. Certification may not guarantee you the best education, but certification is the basis on which people make judgments, first of all, on whether you go on further, and secondly, whether they are going to employ you. And you've got to take that seriously. You've got to give your children a chance. And I want to say to you that, look, take your children and get them vaccinated and make sure that they get a decent education. We have the potential now for a combination of online learning and face-to-face. The COVID virus, that is one of the positive elements of it, that we've been able to get the education going effectively online, and therefore we should try and take advantage of the opportunity. There is no substitute for face-to-face teaching and learning. Online education is good, and it is better for some than for others, but the combination of online learning and face-to-face is perhaps the best combination that you can have. So I thank you very much for listening to me this morning. I hope that you'll go and get vaccinated if you are an adult, and I hope that you'll help your children to get vaccinated if you are a parent. And to all those young people who are watching, I want to say to you, I've spent half my life in education. Other people might know me in politics and government and parliament and stuff like that, but I spent the better part of my life in education. And I want to say that education is really, really important, and that you should not do anything to prevent yourself from getting the best education that you can. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. This is Brighter Morning with Bhoe, and I am Bhoe Tiwari. And we have our first guest on the line this morning, and he is Dr. Winford James. So we want to welcome him to the show and to have a conversation with him. Good morning, Dr. James. How are you?
Good morning, Dr. Tiwari. I am strong and good this morning.
Very good. I hope I didn't get you up too early.
Well, this is the time when I take my morning walk.
Yes, so I deprived you of that.
That's correct.
Oh gosh,
But
I'm so sorry.
I
I hope you'll pick it up during the day. I try to walk about 5 o'clock in the evening because I get up so early for this program. So, but the walking is really good. You get a chance to think and reflect, and more than that, of course, you get the physical exercise. And when after about 35 minutes you start to sweat, you really feel good.
Excellent. You know the thing. You know the
Yeah.
thing. I can go out to the field this afternoon. No problem.
Yes, okay. Can we increase the volume for Dr. James so we can hear him better? We're just trying to increase the volume for you here. Now,
Well,
this,
I'm doing that on my side.
right, what we are trying to do this week is to talk with people having different points of view, different perspectives on independence. We're looking backwards a little bit on how we have done, what we have done well, what we have not done well. We're looking at the current situation of our country in the midst of this COVID crisis. And the future is coming at us whether we like it or not. And we've got to find a way of navigating the future. So these three things we want to explore from different perspectives with different people. So I want to start by asking you if you would simply reflect a little bit on the last 59 years and make an assessment of where you think we are, what we have achieved, what opportunities we've missed.
That's a very broad question.
Of course.
Yes, very broad question. We know that Dr. Eric Williams. By the way, I'm getting an echo so that I can't think easily with the echo. Every time I say something, there's an echo. If you can remove that echo for me, that would be fine.
All right, the technical people are working on it now to see if it's from our side here.
Yes, it's from your.
All right, okay. Let's see if we can get the
Good.
echo out.
That would be nice because it intervenes in my
Disturbing,
thinking before.
yes. All right, they're working on it, but go ahead.
Right. So I was saying that Dr. Williams took us to independence in the 1960s, 1962 to be exact, and we, without having to go through all the details of his political history and so on, and the political history of Trinidad and Tobago, when he let down his bucket in Woodford Square, without going through all the details, we know that we won self-government from the British in 1962 as a result of the efforts of Dr. Williams and his team. And the country has been independent since that time, although, of course, the country has improved on the legislation that it inherited from the British, so that the country made new laws, uh, adjusted the constitution along the way because there was a constitution in place, and we have arrived at the state where we have gone through changes in the constitution because that's the major document by which we run our lives here. So we've had changes made to the constitution, ostensibly to make us more independent in our actions. But we have arrived at 2021 with Tobago in the news with respect to its search for greater autonomy, its search for self-determination, its search for equality of status. So the country, of course, is independent. We can't doubt that. The question is whether it has traveled far enough, and I don't think so. And the Tobago is the test case here. Tobago has been knocking on the door of equality of status and self-determination for a long time. We know what happened in 1977 with that motion that was moved in the House and so on, Tobago to be accorded, greatest self-determination and so on and so on. We know that it was heavily limited. We know 1980 the Tobago House of Assembly was reconstituted in a watered-down manner. We know that there were the changes again to the House of Assembly Act in 1996, right? But we have arrived in 2021 um, with an effort to have Tobago achieve what it has long been calling for, and that is equality of status and self-determination. I know, though, if you want us to continue along those lines, but I'm saying the country is independent, but one of the components of the unit is crying out for independence, not independence, it's crying out for greater self-determination, and has not been getting it. And that, to my mind, is a shame, because self-determination could only be an expression of improvement in the governance of the country, for the whole country. In other words, it should not be a threat to Trinidad that Tobago should be seeking to have equality of status at this time. So we are independent, but for me, the thing that stands out in 2021 is that Tobago is still being governed centrally. The Trinidad, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, sometimes regarded as the government of Trinidad, is controlling from the center. And every proposal every government comes up with retains that control from the center. And that really should not be. And we hope that when the parliament reconvenes and the parliament discusses the proposals of the JSC that have been adopted by the cabinet, that good sense will prevail.
We can continue along the line that you are that you have set in motion there, because that is important to you, and it raises the critical question within the context of independence for Trinidad and Tobago. Is there a problem or a challenge that we need to address, and is there a solution that we need to find to make the independence of the country more comprehensive through greater autonomy for Tobago? So we have no problem with exploring that.
Okay.
But you talked about the work of the JSC and the bill before Parliament. Do you think that the bill addresses, in your estimation, the issues of autonomy in the way that you would like to see?
No, not at all. There's hardly anything.
What is missing?
There are two bills. There's the autonomy bill, and then there is the island government bill.
Yes.
Neither of them addresses almost any issue to my satisfaction. There are superficial changes. There's a question of a lack of definition of equality of status. Self-determination only comes in two schedules of responsibility. One of the schedules deals with policy making via law, and the other deals with administrative responsibility for matters that are really controlled by the central government. But if you get into the details, you will see that where policy making, that is to say, law, responsibility in law for a particular area of jurisdiction in the island, you will see that the law is so crafted, the changes are so crafted as to deny Tobago final determination of any state of affairs. It's up to Trinidad. Parliament can always intervene. The Parliament, of course, Parliament intervenes via the Parliament. But the point I'm making here is that there is always a clause that says subject to. Either it says so expressly, or it says so by implication. Subject to the Parliament, subject to the Cabinet. Tobago has powers. And as I said, there is no definition of equality of status. There is no definition of self-determination. There is no established boundary just yet. We have moved from definition to definition. In fact, we have moved sometimes to no definition. And yet, Tobago's development hangs on a proper definition of Tobago within what is called a unitary state, but because that is not part of our constitution in terms of language, we would call the sovereign democratic state of Trinidad and Tobago. So we have had this thing going on for years and years and years and years, with deleterious consequences to Tobago. Yes, Tobago has not been able to develop well precisely because the governance arrangements are not facilitative of development by the people of the island. The question of representative democracy is very dead in Tobago, if not absent. I mean, there is a form of representative democracy in the sense that people go to the polls for the parliamentary elections and for the Tobago House of Assembly elections. That happens. But when you talk about the real governance of the country, how people are involved in the decision making, how the House of Assembly itself is governed by the laws that are in place, and you realize we are not going to get very far. The question of Tobago's development is exceedingly important, and there is little progress in the act, in the bills, on that matter. How do you arrange the funding of Tobago's development? How do you arrange the funding of Tobago's recurrent development? All these things are very poorly done. Poorly, I say, because the control is not given to Trinidad, to Tobago, to run its own affairs. We don't have a Bill of Rights, something akin to it, in the new bills that have been presented to the population. And very importantly, Trinidad is not, the population in Trinidad is not brought into the picture for them to, make their present or to see themselves as needing to make representation, so to speak, of what they think about this because they are part of it. It's been focused on Tobago, and it's been seen as if this is solely a Tobagonian thing, which of course it is not. Now, I suppose you can proceed as if that is the case, but eventually down the road you are going to have to deal with it. How to integrate Tobago within a new sense of statehood that allows both islands to develop according to the discretions of its peoples, or the people of each island, that is.
All right.
So, I mean, I might be rambling here, but I except you ask me specific questions, I have to ramble in that way. But it's not
well, I'll ask you very specific questions now.
yes.
The first thing is, what is your idea of autonomy? Specifically, what would that involve? Secondly, how do you see an island government functioning if you feel that there is still too much power in the hands of central government? How would you get the democracy that you need in Tobago rather than a political elite being in charge of the government of Tobago? And you raise the question of funding, financing. How would the financing arrangement for Tobago work? And I give you these four things together so that you can get a chance to connect them and elaborate.
Well, I am accustomed doing this. I'm part of the discussion in the country, but particularly in Tobago, with respect to how best can we go about giving Tobago what a large side in Tobago says that it wants. So I'm part of that, and I don't think anybody else has written as voluminously as I on the matter. And my columns have been coming first, for a long time now. It was Newsday, and I shifted to the Express, and now I am with the Guardian. Of course, there were two Tobago papers, the Tobago News, the Tobago Beacon. I think it's more than two. But I have been engaging with these issues, and that's a long, long time. We are talking about the early 1970s, when I was at
Have
university.
you
And of
here,
course,
you know.
sorry?
That's why we have you here this morning to talk about independence, you know. I know the
Well,
history. I know the
yeah,
contribution. Yeah.
right, great. So I'm just reminding you, you might know, but I'm just reminding you, our viewing public, that there is some kind of history behind what I am saying. So if we choose one of the areas to say, well, what in fact will give me satisfaction that Tobago has a sufficiency of autonomy, and to put it very simply, a Bill of Rights. Tobago needs a Bill of Rights, which it develops for itself and which it tries to work out as it performs government. It needs to, and we have come up with a number of those rights, which the government of Trinidad and Tobago must not interfere with once we have decided that these are the rights we have. And it's not an exhaustive list up front, right? So
But let me
and I'm,
stop you. Let me stop you and ask you something here, which I think always comes up in this conversation, sometimes silently. Because, you know, even though we have a democracy, sometimes people are afraid to speak and ask questions. I've always found that to be a problem. But,
okay.
but for instance, you say you want the people of Tobago to develop a Bill of Rights, and there must be no interference in the formulation of that by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. What about
Yes, I'm saying that.
what about the people in Trinidad? Can they have a say, or should they have a say, or should they act as if they are not involved at all in the Bill of Rights established by the people who reside in Tobago?
Okay. Let me answer that question by first saying that the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the people of Tobago and the people of Trinidad have been involved in the development of the governance arrangements. But they are involved, that is to say, Trinidad is involved via the parliamentary structure and via the cabinet structure. If I were to interpret your question in a different kind of way, whether they ought to be involved, I would say no, because we have been two entities for quite a long time. Things started in the 1880s and has come down to this time. You know, when Tobago's economy failed calamitously in the 1880s and so on, and in the 1890s there was a formalization of the union of the two islands. We have had Tobago being called mischievously, if you ask me, a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have had that status to our own detriment for a long time. But I don't think at the stage that we have reached in our history that Trinidad can offer its assistance. But some ideas can come from Trinidad for sure. I would be the first to listen to ideas from Trinidad. But we have reached a stage where it is quite clear that there are two entities. And one of the entities is saying, look, we have not had what we have wanted for a long time. So we want to create our own Bill of Rights. If you give us views, we will take the views at our discretion. But your views must not be determining of what Tobago wants. So if you look at it from that point of view, we are saying, or I am saying, Tobago must determine the rights that it wants to see itself have. And as I said, there's a specification. I can't give you the bills now, the actual rights now, because that's a matter of memory. But those things are available. The point is, just as you've noticed, is the question: who is responsible for it? Who is responsible for determining the bills of Tobago? Tobago is responsible for the bills of Tobago, or the rights of Tobago. We have had the cabinet doing this for a long time, and we have not been satisfied. Yeah, right now the JSC is a creature of the Parliament, a creature of the PNM and the UNC. Essentially, we have of course, I think, two independents as part of the JSC. But we know that this is something from the cabinet, something from the parliament, and we know that Tobago only has representation in 2 seats of the 41 seats in the lower house. We know that, and we know that the voice that is majoritarian, the voice that determines what is accepted and what is rejected in terms of new ideas, is mostly a Trinidadian voice. So to answer that question very, very concisely, no, Trinidad is not going to be or should not be involved in the determination of the kinds of rights that Tobago wants. That should come from Tobago, and Tobago only. Tobago can seek advice from anywhere, including Trinidad. But the final determination of the rights that will be part of the bill, that will constitute the bill, is something that should be under the control and the discretion of Tobago. So that answers one question. If you don't wish to engage, I can go on to another
Well,
issue.
I asked you 4 questions, and I know you
Yeah.
have a good, I know you have a good mind. So you can address them one by one, but we're coming to the end now, so you've got to be a little sharper in your focus on each
My
one,
goodness. Well,
right?
very quick, let's deal
Time.
with funding.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's deal with funding, how Tobago should be funded. Currently, Tobago is funded as a result of the intervention of the Dispute Resolution Commission, and has been given a range of percentages for its recurrent and development budget. And in brief, right now we operate at the bottom level with 4.03, and we can go up to 6.09. Right? The government, of course, has proposed that it should be 6.8, but we are not told how the government arrived at 6.8. And if you go back to the time when Ho Choi Charles got the dispute resolution to deal with the matter, you will realize that what was used was a formula used across the world, and that formula, of course, is head of population. A percent of the budget according to the head of population. So if you have 60,000 souls in the whole country, you have to determine the budget based on the per head of the population. So each person in the country has the same percentage of the budget. So if you have 1 million people in the country, 1.3 million, and so on, including, let's say, 60,000 Tobago, everybody must be entitled to the same percentage of the budget. Now, if you do the right analysis, you realize that if you do it per head of population, you will realize that everybody is entitled, therefore, to about 5% of the population. So you take your budget and you give everybody, you work out a budget, that's to say a recurrent budget in relation to each person in Tobago being entitled to 5%, just as each person in Trinidad. Nothing unfair here. What applies to the people in Trinidad applies to people in Tobago. You realize that we will have enough money to handle the recurrent needs of Tobago. And then the question of development comes in. How do you get the development thing? Well, the development depends on the boundaries of Tobago, the resources that Tobago has. And to be very, very brief about this, when you calculate the size of Tobago, including the maritime space, not simply the terrestrial space, you realize that Tobago is bigger than Trinidad, right? In fact, Tobago occupies some 60% of the terrestrial and maritime space of the country. And if you see it that way, then you work out a development formula using economic science. You work out a formula, and you will see that one of the best ways of doing that is to add the 60% of the equation to the 5% per head of population, and you divide that by 2, and you get about 35% of the budget. And you use, of course, Tobago would have the ability to borrow locally and internationally and so on. And you use the money now to develop Tobago on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, because just as the development in Trinidad is on behalf of, to a certain extent, of course, of the whole island. The whole island is developed, but it's in part of the whole country. Then you can have something like that happening. But what I have given you here, a scientific formula, a way of doing that, but you have to determine what the boundaries are. And you know that the government has been having some issues with respect to where Tobago's maritime boundaries begin and end. So we don't want to go through that, but I'm saying that very quickly. So that's another matter there. The question of equality of status, I don't think you put it that way, but I think that's what you meant. How can we determine that Tobago is equal to Trinidad, as the preamble to the new bills say? How can we determine that? Well, very quickly. We can't do it in the House of Representatives because Tobago only has 2 seats there, right? But we can do it in the Senate, because the Senate is totally an appointed body. It's not an elected body. And you can achieve the equality of status there by giving Tobago the same number of seats in the Senate as Trinidad is going to have, right? And of course, we know how you can achieve the breaking of a tie in the Senate. But the important thing is that at the level of the Senate, Tobago has a voice, and it can, of course, wheel and deal with the senators from Trinidad with respect to what should be passed, what already having been passed in the lower house should now go forward as policy, budgetary policy, economic policy for the whole country. And that is not only simply the equality of seats in the Senate, but it also has to do with concurrence, what the cabinet comes up with in the country. So long as it's an issue that affects Tobago, Tobago should have concurrence, the right to concur. So I'm talking about 2 elements that will allow or would allow Tobago to have equal status in Trinidad, is giving Tobago and Trinidad, each island, the same number of seats in the Senate, and of course giving Tobago the right to the House of Assembly, that is, the right to concurrence. So that's the question of. Could you give me the 4th issue?
No, I had raised the issue of the autonomy. I had raised the issue of island government. I'd raised the issue of funding or financing. And,
yes.
I raised the issue of the relationship between decisions in Tobago about Tobago and the role of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago living in Trinidad to have any say or influence in that process.
So, but I believe I have answered all of those.
Right. So we come into the end now, and I'm going to have to close up. But I mean, to someone listening, I think a lot of people would concede, a lot of reasonable people would concede that, look, Tobago is the balance, the scale is too tipped against the autonomous existence of Tobago right now, and we need to do something about that. But I think they would also say, based on what you are saying there, that you want to tip the scale the other way in a way that would really make it very, very difficult for Trinidad and Tobago as a nation of two islands side by side to cohere. Now I have to close now. I just have a minute. I'm giving you a minute to respond to that.
Oh no, I'm not tipping any balance towards Tobago at all. I want balance between the two islands. And what I'm saying, if you
no, but people would say you want to tip the scale the other way.
To ask to govern to govern.
No,
we have a Tobago Assembly, you know.
No, I know that. I mean right. In terms of all the things that you said. All right.
People might, but we can have a conversation as reasonable people.
Yes.
All that I have said, though, is backed up by knowledge, is backed up by science. We can be dispassionate about what we say and respectful.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I am a respectful man, but I'm also a man of knowledge. I use knowledge as a basis of decision making. And I am saying here, Trinidad has to join the conversation. And Trinidad, of course, must have a view as to how Trinidad itself must develop, how much on itself.
Well, that is another matter, yes, of course.
And that matter has not come up in the way the government has presented its constitutional changes.
All right.
So I am not,
I've got to close now.
Okay.
I've got to close now, Dr. Winford. We'll have another conversation.
We were going until 8 o'clock.
Thank you for the opportunity to engage. And we move on now to Andrew Chang and the news.